Hi folks, I have had a busy weekend, and as I was putting together the news episode, which would normally post today, I realized that I had two choices. I could put out a shitty episode, or I could be late with it and put out a decent episode. I opted for the latter choice, but as you can tell, there's over an hour's worth of material for this file. That's because I was a guest this past week on the Packard Pokesat podcast. So I'm putting that in the feed in place of the usual news episode today. Patreon supporters, don't worry, this is a freebie. When I put up the news episode, I'll ding you for that. In the meantime, I want to tell you that Trump's tweets about North Korea, Senator Bob Corker, and Mike Pence bailing on the Colts game are all distractions designed to make you forget that Trump has repealed the birth control requirements for health care that Obama put into place, and that the Senate will be voting next week on banning abortions after 20 weeks, even if the life of the mother is in danger. Those are the things that you should be focused on. I'll have more to say about this in the news episode, which I'll release either this week or next weekend. But in the meantime, here's the episode of Packard Pokesat that I'm on.
What time is it? It's Packard Pokesat time. Hat? Check. Shirt? Check. Pants? Optional. Mug? Double check. Check us out at cafepress.com/Packard Pokesat, where you can get all this great merchandise and more.
Do you like Packard Pokesat and want to hear it on demand and on the go? Download the free app today at Stitcher.com. Available on iOS, Android, Nook, and iPad.
This is Packard Pokesat, and I'm poking at your news. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another fine edition of Packard Pokesat. I am your immutable and unmutable host, Packard Sonic, and joining me tonight from the far East Coast is the Atheist Ranger.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And joining us for our special guest host tonight is Tucker Drake from the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast.
Howdy.
How's your beer can? That you're living in.
It's doing. That's about all I can say.
Listen to your show. You talk about all the work that you have to do on there. That's amazing that you have to do all that stuff. So,
oh yeah, it's it's something.
Yeah, it is something. It is something. Recently, there was a tragedy in Las Vegas. There was a shooter. Nobody knows his motives yet, and people are just saying some really stupid stuff, especially the Republicans. One particular Republican is Senator John Thune. He blames the shooting victims, basically. Well, not quite blaming them, but he's basically saying that if you're in a situation like that, is to get small. I think maybe he was taking some drugs at the time, or he's been listening to certain songs that says get small, because in this particular shooting, they didn't know where the shooter was shooting from, and to stay in place in that particular area, you had nowhere to hide, and getting small would have not have helped. I mean, because the guy was literally shooting rapid fire. I mean, he had a thing called a bump stock, which was a legal device attached to a legal gun, which makes it act like a machine gun, and he was literally spraying bullets everywhere. So getting small would not have helped. This was his exact wording here. I think people are going to have to take steps in their own lives to take precautions to protect themselves, and in situations like that, try to stay safe. As someone said, get small. Sometimes I hear this like in movies with the military or whatever. They say try to get small, try to stay undercover. That's where that's probably coming from. But the fact is, you're at an outdoor concert, and this particular concert, there was like nowhere to hide. Where are you going to get small at? Atheist Ranger, your thoughts?
Well, this Republican is just rather dumb because, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but if you watch, I think it was like the third Star Wars movie, having the high ground is important, especially with a gun. Mm-hmm. If you're high up and you're shooting down low, there's not many places you can hide.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this guy was literally spraying bullets everywhere. From what I understand, there was about 400 people that got hit roughly, give or take. And fortunately, the body count was kind of low. I mean, it was 59 people, 58 plus the shooter, which was 59. So the fact is that so few people actually were killed in this. It's amazing based on how many bullets the guy spread out. And the fact is that he was firing, according to the police department, for over 10 minutes, about 11 minutes approximately. So the fact is that so many people were able to survive this is amazing in itself. But this guy's comments are still amazingly stupid.
Yeah, I mean, this man clearly needs to talk to someone like in the military, because, you know, when it comes to dealing with a gun, like any other combat situation, having the high ground is important.
Exactly. Tucker, your thoughts?
Well, he's clearly an idiot, and he's trying to rationalize his beliefs that, well, you know, we've got to have as many guns as we possibly can, because, you know, it's not only having the high ground, and it's the fact that, you know, this is a broad open area. So even if he'd been at ground level and just swept his gun back and forth in front of the crowd, he would have mowed down hundreds of people.
Exactly. If he had just been on the ground level. And there was indications the shooter was hoping to survive after he had done this. I'd imagine that he was trying to get up there. He was going to shoot for a while and then try to get out of there, because he had actually set up cameras in the lower parts of the building and in the hallway in which he was in. He was kind of hoping it's like, okay, if I see these people coming, I'll be able to, you know, walk out like I was like one of the guests that didn't know what was going on, you know? And of course, then there's the fake story that's been running around the internet saying, oh, there was a second shooter, when this has already been debunked thoroughly as well. So if you hear anybody that passes on a news story to you say, oh, there was two shooters and the media's not covering it, it's because it's baloney. It's total nonsense. It's been thoroughly debunked.
I've been in Nashville, down at in the center of the city. Basically, they have a fireworks display on the 4th of July. And I went there one year, and it was really amazing because of the, you know, the reflections and the echoes you heard off the buildings as the fireworks went off.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, not that I've been to Las Vegas, but I'm sure it was the same way there, that, you know, the sound was bouncing off all the other buildings. And, you know, I've been told that it's really hard to figure out exactly where gunshots are coming from just by the sound.
Yeah. Not to mention when the shooting first started, because Las Vegas, you know, it's Las Vegas, that people thought, well, the sound effects of the gunfire must have been part of the show, because they didn't know what it was going on for the first few seconds, until people started, you know, getting shot. And then it's like, oh my God, we're getting shot here.
Have you seen the photo of the guy who's standing up, flipping the bird in the direction of the shooter?
No, I have not seen that. That's the first I've heard about that.
Yeah. No, it's pretty amazing, because that would not be my first thought, to stand up.
Yeah, wow. There's people that they take a lot of, you know, balls to do things, and that would be one of them.
Yeah. That's a huge set. That's all you can say.
Yeah, he had quite the set on him. Wow, I had not heard that one.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it took them several minutes to figure out, of course, where the gunfire was coming from. And the only reason why they found out where he was shooting from is because the smoke that from, you know, the gunpowder or whatever, he set off the smoke detector in his room. And, you know, Las Vegas is, because they're right on the bleeding edge of technology there, because, you know, California is like right next door, and they have to, you know, keep track of all the other technical garbage they got going on there. They were able to narrow all the smoke down to just that one room. So it was like, okay, well, there's no reason why there's smoke going on in anywhere else, and this seems to be where the shooter's coming from in this general building. So, you know, they put one and one together and got gun runner there. One other thing here I have to mention, and I've mentioned this on the show a number of times, because of the earliness that I get up in the morning, I listen to the radio, and I listen to Coast to Coast, because I like to listen to stupid people and go, wow, you're stupid. But Sunday night, Monday morning, when I was heading into work, I was listening to this, and they were talking about it had just happened. And the radio announcer, whoever it was, George or whatever stupid idiot that was on that morning, he was saying that there was a person of interest. It turns out it was the girlfriend. And they were saying, oh, well, I hope she does the right thing and kills herself, because apparently this guy had killed himself. And it's like, they can't find her, but they hope that she had killed herself too, based on what his actions were. And I was thinking, wow, you people are immoral monsters. And this is a program that all gets on there. It's like, oh, let's talk about God's love and all this other happy nonsense. And I'm like, you're very, very not loving. if you're going around saying, well, this person who was not even there should kill themselves because reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
And we are with Tucker Drake from the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. Tucker, I have a few questions for you. Were you ever religious? And if you were, how did you come to your non-belief?
I was raised Lutheran, and I ultimately lost my faith in church.
That's an interesting place to lose it. Did you look behind the pew? Because sometimes, those pews are really hard, and sometimes stuff falls out of the pockets for the pastors to pick up later,
No, I was sitting in the back, and we had cushions on our pews. So,
oh, lucky you!
No, I was. I was like 16, 17, somewhere around there, maybe 18, and I was having doubts, and they happened to be reading that particular week from the Sermon on the Mount.
No,
and they read from the section where, God condemns, or, Jesus condemns divorce. Well, my parents had divorced some years back, and it was really for the best. And my girlfriend at the time, her parents were going through a divorce, and her father was abusive, both physically and emotionally. And, I knew that there was literally no way that anybody could reason with him to convince him that, well, he's being a jerk and that he needs to stop. So when I heard, Jesus condemned divorce, I was like, well, that just doesn't make any sense, because there's no logical way you can convince me that my parents would be better off still being married, or my girlfriend's parents would be better off being married, because I know what they're like. I know their act, I know a lot of the details involved, and anybody who says that is crazy. And I also realized, well, our church doesn't have a problem with divorce. And if, it's Jesus who's condemning divorce, not one of the disciples or somebody who came after him condemning divorce, and we agree with it, we agree with the idea of divorce, then obviously we don't put a whole lot of stock in what Jesus actually said, assuming he actually said any of that. And then the next verse they read was also from the Sermon on the Mount, and that was where Jesus says, I say to you that any man who looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery. I'm like, but that's how we're wired up. If we weren't wired up like that, the species would have trouble reproducing. Anybody who doesn't accept that and understand that doesn't understand humanity. How can an all-powerful being not understand, the biological drives which are built into us to propagate the species?
Yeah, we would definitely not even be here. We would have gone extinct by now. That kind of like the pandas are kind of going. They're like on the endangered list right now, because they look at the other panda and goes, "Yeah, I don't want any of that. I think I'll just go over here and eat some bamboo." Right,
and actually, their diet is part of the problem, because they prefer bamboo, but they're not really adapted to eat it. So they have to eat way more food than they would if they ate, meat or any other kinds of plants out there, because the particular bamboo they prefer is very low in nutrition.
Well, that explains so much.
And the other thing that I found out that was just stunning is that nobody knew pandas existed until the 1920s.
Yeah, you don't see those in the Bible, do you?
No.
What's always very funny is sometimes you see those pictures of the animals going to Noah's Ark, and they show two male lions going in side by side, and I'm like, yeah, good luck getting those two male lions to reproduce there, buddy.
Right. And I don't know if lions would be considered kosher or not, because it's not really 2 by 2. It's, if they're clean animals, there's 7 pairs, And if they're unclean, it's just one pair.
Yeah. The Bible is very contradictory in that part, where it says in one part it says 2 by 2, and then it said 7 by something or whatever. That it was completely nonsense. We actually talked about that on my secondary podcast, The Atheist, the Bible, No Wardrobe, a while back. And we basically debunked the whole Noah story with just one word: feces.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen the video that they have? Somebody's posted it on YouTube of, it's supposedly how the sanitation system worked on Noah's Ark, according to Ken Ham.
I've seen Ken Ham's. I saw a video of how Ken Ham thinks it was done, like some kind of rotating stock thing, elevator or whatever inside the building, which was supposed to lift him up and shoot it out somewhere.
Yeah. I've shown that to engineers. They all broke down in hysterics because apparently not only is that really convoluted for what it's trying to do, it actually would have caused the Ark to sink quite easily. It's one of those things. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm not a trained engineer, and I'm going, this doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. And and then I showed the link, the video to some engineers, and they were like, oh no, this will not work at all. You've got this giant cavity in the middle of the ship where water is, because that's how it works. And they're going, this will cause this instability problem. If you get a big enough wave, it'll overflow. And why would you have it go this way when you could do it this other way? And it would be vastly simpler and easier.
Yeah, he's just making stuff up at that point, because it does not say, we've read that, and it does not say anything about that. So everything past that point, it's just all out of his imagination past that point.
Yeah. And I know there was I think the proper term is a marine architect. That's the guy that designed ships, who he did an article for somebody and just ripped the design, the exterior design of the Ark to shreds. Mm-hmm. He says, because the one thing that I remember is that the prow on the Ark, on Ken Ham's version of the Ark, is utterly unnecessary because it's not a powered vessel.
Exactly. What are they going to do? Get people out and pushing with their feet, or get a couple penguins out there and pushing them?
Right. And I can remember when I was a kid seeing one of those, Noah's Ark things, because they thought it was up on Mount Ararat in Turkey. Mm-hmm. And they did a water tank test with a rectangular design. Mm-hmm. And, they shook the tank so that it would, to simulate rough waters. And wow, it did fantastic as far as staying upright and afloat. Whereas when they had something that was sort of like Ham's design, and that it had a prow on it and stuff like that, it promptly sank and went to the bottom of the tank.
And the thing is, I've seen a video where they showed the back of the building. It's actually a building. There's actually a building part on there. If you see pictures of the Ken Ham's boat or whatever online or whatever, they just show the front because it's like, oh yeah, here's the Ark. But if you go around to the back side, there's literally a building attached to it. Let's just say that there was a major flood in that area. The building would sink, or I guess, or get washed away.
That's what I always bring up when it comes to the Noah's Ark thing, is that because I've talked to engineers too, and some of the engineers that I've spoken to said that Ken Ham's version, like the boat's so big that it's no way it's possibly seaworthy, even by today's standards.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There was no way. I mean, he had to have metal attachments and whatnot put in there just to keep it safe, so people could actually just walk through it. And they didn't have that technology back then.
Yeah. And I'm sure you saw all the photos of the cranes and everything else, hoisting stuff. Have you read, the book is called The Ark Before Noah by Irving Finkel?
No, I've never even heard of that book.
Oh, wow. You will definitely want to check it out. Irving Finkel he works for the British Museum in
Mhm.
London, and he's an expert on Babylon.
Okay.
And some guy showed up one day in like the late 80s, early 90s, because they have a day where bring your historical stuff to us and we'll tell you what it is. And this guy showed up and he's like, I got this little clay tablet. I don't know what it is. Finkel looked at it and said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And he tried to get the guy to let him borrow it, and the guy wouldn't let him do it. And it is the oldest known version of a flood myth. And it predates, it predates it predates even the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's how far back it goes.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he eventually managed to he kept after this guy for like decades, and he managed to finally get the guy to loan him the thing long enough so that they could do, they could scan it, preserve it, and he could do a good translation of it. And it is it's the earliest account of a flood myth, and the unique thing about it is that instead of the ark, instead of being a like a barge style or Ken Ham's boat style, it is what's known as a coracle, which is a round boat, which are they're made out of rope, and they're a traditional boat in that part of Iraq where Babylon used to be. Gosh, I think it's like 7,000 years old, the tablet or something like that. It's insanely old. And the book he wrote about, the getting the tablet, translating it, and all the history associated with it is fascinating. And it also has the complete text of that tablet in it. But it is really, it's like taking a college course. It is really intense.
I just want to mention, I have seen the boat that you're talking about, because it's like the round boat that
right.
It kind of looks like a sombrero.
Yeah.
But I've seen that where there's a video that was on that. Anyway, I do have some other questions for you.
Okay.
You're doing a lot of different stuff on your podcast. You do a news episode, and then you do you've been reading books. You read one a while back that talked about how they explained like where we get the number 7 from, like the planets and whatnot. And now you're reading the Apocrypha. How far along are you in that book anyway? What made you decide to read the Apocrypha, by the way?
What made me decide to read the Apocrypha was I finished up T.W. Doan's Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions, and I was like,
that's the one.
Yeah, I'm like, I got to have something else to read. What am I going to pick? And I was kind of, sticking around thinking about different things. And it's everybody's done the Book of Mormon. There's plenty of people doing the Quran. So I was like, I need something to get people who, to listen to me rather than listen to the other guys, because I'm nowhere near as funny as, Noah and Heath and all those at Scathing Atheist or whatever.
Yeah. I always say when people say you're funny, I say, well, looks aren't everything. I'm just saying. They're just.
I always say any humor on the podcast is completely unintentional. So I was like, well, nobody I know of has done the Apocrypha, and Catholics follow some of the books of the Apocrypha. Greek Orthodox follow other books. The Ethiopian Christians follow, follow all the apocryphal books, and the Russian Orthodox follow a subset of the apocryphal books. So I was like, that kind of covers a lot of the major non-Protestant religions.
Right. You said in one of your shows that you had actually found out that referencing some of your other materials, like, wow, there's this other book they didn't even mention, and it's part of it that you're going to have to be reading into it. Have you gotten into that part? And I'm just kind of curious, how far in advance have you been reading your books? I mean,
I go into them cold.
Okay. So you just read them when you get a chance to read them, then, basically.
Yeah. And the one I was talking about that I didn't know existed, I just wrapped that up. It was actually fairly short, so I managed to bang it out in a single episode, which was the one that went up last Sunday.
Yeah, all right, then that's one I heard just recently then, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was just wrapped up in that one then. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have a couple other questions here. What made you decide to go into podcasting?
Well,
Besides glamour.
I'll be honest. At the time, I had a really crappy job. What I say that, and then of course it kind of, in some ways, it beats my current job. But I could listen to anything I wanted to because I could wear headphones, and so because I worked with a lot of Bubba types.
Yeah, I know the people.
I had started downloading, all these atheist podcasts, and I was listening to this one podcast, and the other thing is at the time, I didn't have a car, so I was having to take the bus to and from work, which was a 2-hour trip one way.
Wow.
Right. So I'm on my phone because the bus has free Wi-Fi. I'm on my phone reading news articles and all these other things. And I was listening to this one podcast that was atheist related, and they were talking about an article, and I had actually read that article, so I was familiar with it. And they were asking all these questions about things, and I'm like, you guys could not have read past the first 2 paragraphs in that article, or you wouldn't be asking these questions. They weren't like rhetorical type questions. They were questions that, you wouldn't ask if you were familiar with the topic at all, because the information in the article basically would blow those ideas out of the water easily. And on that same episode, they had an email from somebody where the person wrote in and says, you guys, you make mistakes and, you don't really correct them. And they're like, well, hey, we're just basically, we're just here to talk and you guys get to listen in, and we don't really care if we make a mistake. Not, wow. Hey, we're doing this and, we know it's wrong, but we can get a really good joke out of it or something like that. It was just, we just don't care. And then they complained. They said, we got to get $400 an episode out of this, or we're not going to be able to keep doing the podcast. And I'm like, okay, I know what these guys make because they've talked about their day jobs, right? And they're all in industries where they make close to 6-figure incomes.
Jeez.
Right. And I know what doing a podcast costs. If you depending on how you set the thing up, it can either cost you nothing or next to nothing to do it. And I'm like, if I could make $400 a month, forget about $400 a week doing a podcast, I could be out of this fucking beer can.
Yeah.
So I was like, and I, and I was pretty mad because, hey, if we're going to claim we're better than the religious types, then when we find out we're wrong, we got to admit it.
No, you're absolutely correct. If we make a mistake on the show, we try to correct it. I mean, recently we had a show where we talked about the Scolari guy, whatever his name was. He was the one that went to jail because he did some insider trading and whatnot. And we did make a correction on the following show because we thought he was involved with the EpiPen scandal where they jumped up the prices. It turns out he was just saying, yeah, they should have a right to jump up their prices for no reason whatsoever.
Oh, yeah. Not Scolari. I know who you're talking about. Scarelli. That's his name.
Scarelli, that's it. Yeah. We did correct it later on. It just that someone got their panties in a bunch because we got a piece of information wrong, and we thought we had their information right. We strive to try to be correct on the show as much as we possibly can. And if we make a mistake, we own up to it later on. We try to, at least we try to, but I mean, we can't catch everything, unfortunately. So
speaking of Scarelli, have you read the transcripts of them trying to seat a jury in his trial?
No, I have not.
Oh, I will drop a link to that story because they are some of the funniest things you have ever read in your life.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because like one of the things is somebody, like one of the jurors, the reason, or potential jurors, the reason he gave for not being able to serve on the jury was they were mad at Scarelli for disrespecting the Wu-Tang Clan.
I'll have to remember that one next time I get called for jury duty. Did he disrespect the Wu-Tang Clan? Well, I'm out then. I can't do this.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, it's just hysterical about all the stuff that, somebody like walks into the thing. They had no idea who he was, but they looked at his face and they said, he just looks guilty.
I've actually heard that. I was involved in a court case a number of years back, and the judge was going through things like that and asking what they thought, whatever. And one of them says, well, the reason why he's on trial is because he's automatically guilty. Is like the judge's like, no, he's not guilty just because he's on trial. That's the whole reason. So they dismissed him. And I was like, oh man, I wish I had thought of saying something like that. I would have been able to get out of jury duty. I've been called for jury duty like 4 times, and I've only had to serve once. And I've been able to get out of it other times for other reasons.
Yeah, no. I mean, like one of the things is, somebody says, I think he's a greedy little man.
Nice. I have some other questions here. How do you go about producing your podcast? How do you edit and get them posted? I know you're using like Libsyn, but I mean, what do you use to edit your software? And do you just record just audio? I mean, you do like over Skype or you use another chat program to talk with your guests?
When I have a guest on, I use Skype and a program called MP3 Skype Recorder, which is a free program because I can't afford to pay for anything. That it automatically, the great thing about it is like when you do a Skype call, it automatically fires up, starts recording the call.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and you can set it up so that you can, it'll record your guest in one channel and you in the other channel, or it can just, do a mono track where you're both, in the same channel. And then I edit everything in Audacity, which is another free program.
Oh, I'm familiar with Audacity. Your shows are about an hour long. How long do you actually record for? Because I notice a lot of times when you're talking about, it's like, all right, off to the Googles, and then you're like back immediately. How long is the longest time you've had between, okay, we got to check Google or something, and then you came back and said, okay, I have like about an hour's worth of recording here that it's just dead air or me mumbling to myself?
Well, when I go to the Googles, I put Audacity on pause.
Ah, okay. You do it the easy way. Yeah. No, although I have had situations where, I'll have a guest on and we just get to gabbing, and I'll end up with 6 hours of audio I have to edit down. Which is not a lot of fun, but it is what it is. We recently did a crossover show with the Brainstorm podcast, and we had some kind of weird technical difficulty because Google Hangouts, and we recorded for 3 hours, and I spent like 2 hours just clearing out space on my hard drives just so I could edit the video, and it was just 3 hours. So I know that takes a lot of time, and it took me almost a full extra day. So if, let's say you recorded for 6 hours, how long would that take you to edit that?
It would probably take me about 6 hours, because when I do my editing, Audacity has this neat little feature that allows you to speed up the recording. And at 1.5 times normal speed, you get chipmunking of the voices, but it's not so bad that you can't figure things out. So that's how I do the editing. Plus, it also disguises the sound of my voice, since I can't stand the sound of my own voice. So
I totally get that. Most people generally don't like the sound of their own voices. What is one of the more interesting podcast shows you listen to? I mean, besides, this show, Packard Pokes At.
Well, one of my favorite podcasts, it's not atheist related, but the guy who does the podcast certainly has the skeptical mindset in mind when he does the show. Is called My History Can Beat Up Your Politics.
I've heard of that show. I've heard you mention it a few times.
Yeah, no, the guy who does it is his name is Bruce Carlson, and he takes a fairly unbiased look at modern events and in American politics. He doesn't do international because that'd just be way too complicated. But he takes, he takes a current event and then he finds something from American history that kind of matches up with it, and then he does a comparison and contrast with what happened then as to what's happening now or what could happen now. And it's really fascinating because there have been episodes where I've been listening to it and it's like, oh, well, he's going to be talking about this one thing, and it goes along and it's like, wait, no, he's going in a direction I couldn't have possibly imagined he would have found something from our history that matched up with this.
Interesting. So he's seen spiderwebs of history pieces that most people probably were not even aware of, basically.
Right. I mean, sometimes he'll pull out a, just this insanely obscure event, even stuff that happened from recent history. I mean, like there was an episode he did on Ed Muskie in the 70s, who he was, I don't remember if he was a Democratic presidential or vice presidential candidate, but there was questions about his mental capacity and things like that. And he did this right at the time when there were issues with Hillary. And it was amazing the kinds of parallels he found. And it was, he doesn't stretch things so that this is sort of like whatever is happening now. I mean, they are really, really close, eerily close almost. And he did a podcast not too long ago on the emoluments clause in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And it was like, wait, he pulled this weird event that was from, shortly before or shortly after the country was founded. And it's like, wow, I had never even heard of anything like this. And it was really fascinating because of how, detailed he got into it and how important this event, which wouldn't even qualify as a footnote, actually was in how the Constitution was drafted and interpreted.
Interesting. That's interesting. I will have to check out that show. I have one last question here, and then I'm going to turn over the questions over to my co-host. And by the way, thank you, Matt, for joining us. That's one of my other co-hosts. He just joined us now. My last question here is, what do you do outside your podcasting persona? Like, what do you do in real life? I mean, I know, but my podcast listeners might not know.
Well, currently I work for a company that we make medical supplies. Bandages, eye shields for surgeons. So, when they're cutting into somebody and the blood sprays, it doesn't get in their eye. Things like that, which it's job security, but it's not really all that interesting.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I remember you were talking about on one of your previous jobs where you were stamping out these metal pieces and they were being sold or improperly made because they were working with the federal government, as I recall. And you talked to somebody in the federal government about how shoddy their work was, and it somehow got back to them and you ended up getting let go. That's part of your public record, so I'm not like exposing anything that's you haven't already talked about.
No, I was working for a foundry, and that wasn't why I got let go, but it was not too long after I turned them in to the feds that I happened to get let go. But and that was a bit of a nightmare because I discovered that you can't just call the feds up and say, hey, I know these guys are doing wrong. You have to have an insane amount of level of documentation to give to the feds. Mind you, the feds did show up and investigate, but there was no hope of prosecution without me giving them this massive amount of documentation, which I couldn't have had access to because it didn't exist. Because that was one of the things that the issues I had was with that particular employer was that there were all kinds of things we did. There was no documentation, and there was supposed to be a paper trail for this stuff, and there wasn't.
Oh,
And-
really?
Yeah, yeah. And even if if there was, it was nothing I saw, but I should have seen. I mean, in the years since, I worked for a company that made parts for Boeing.
Mhm.
And if you make parts for Boeing, the documentation is voluminous. They have, they ship you the material you use. They have specific tags on all that material. They ship you the tooling you're supposed to use to machine that material. You have, you're supposed to run, say, they give you a shipment, you're going to generate 10,000 parts. The tooling is designed for 1,000 parts. And that's when you're supposed to change it out. Doesn't matter if the tooling is still good. When it hits the 1,000 part mark, you have to change that tooling out. You have to keep the old tooling. You have to keep all the scrap material. Boeing has their own inspectors who come into the facility to check the parts that you're running. They weigh all the scrap. They inspect all the discarded tooling. And, so there's huge amounts of documentation. The place I was working at that I reported to the feds, you'd get a pan of parts and they'd say, yeah, machine these or do this or that with them. And there was no paperwork with it.
Wow, that's incredibly slimy.
Yeah. No. So I didn't, they're still in business, but because the fact that the feds showed up there and other places, they've had to change their business practices, and they've lost a number of customers because of me. So,
oh, well, that's not on you. That's on them. I just want to say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have friends who are, at the time I had friends who were in the military and who were in places in Iraq. And I was like, one of my friends who I grew up with could be killed because we shipped somebody a shoddy part. I can't sit idly by. And my family history is such that one of my ancestors was best friends with Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson made him an ambassador to France. So I can't exactly, say whatever. I sort of have to speak up in such a situation.
No, you. I think you did the right thing personally. All right, I am going to turn my questions over to my co-host, Atheist Ranger. You had a question, you said.
I have two actually, and
Okay.
These questions are mostly based on kind of a annoyance. My first question is: when it comes to religion, what is your number one pet peeve and why?
Actually, my number one pet peeve with religion is not so much with the religious, it's with the atheist community. And it has to do with the idea that one religion is worse than another. Because if you understand the history of religion and human psychology, you realize that, because everybody likes to say, well, Islam is the worst religion. They're killing all these people. They're doing all these things. Well, Christianity did that a long time ago. They like to do it, but if you really look at things objectively, they're still doing it today because you have Christians who refuse to seek medical treatment and would rather rely on prayer to treat disease. Well, if you die because your parents or you decided to pray away, your cancer, you're just as dead as if some Islamic nut job shot your ass. And if, so the difference between the two is that, one makes the national news and the other doesn't.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I've gotten into arguments actually with other atheists because they didn't like the fact that like my channel, for example, mostly focuses on, just attacking idiot Christians. And I've actually gotten responses from other atheists because I don't attack Islam enough to their liking.
Yeah. And I mean, look at all the medical research that's being blocked because it offends people. Oh, well, we can't do stem cell research because you use aborted fetus tissue. People are dying because of that. And nobody objects to the fact that the eggs that are the fertilized embryos that are unwanted from IVF procedures, those are burned. Nobody objects to that crap, right. But they object to using fetal tissue from abortions, and you can't use fetal tissue or frozen embryos from IVF treatments that the people who had the procedure don't need anymore for stem cell research.
Speaking of stem cell research, real quick here, I don't know if I heard it on your show because you're reading a news article, or maybe I heard it somewhere else, but they found a way recently they can actually use stem cells from adults now instead of having to go to children. So they can take it right from the person who's donating the stem cells.
If my understanding of it is correct, they have some ability to use them. It's not total. So like they can get the stem cells from your teeth and use those to regrow teeth, but they couldn't use those stem cells in your teeth to, grow you a new kidney or whatever.
Okay. All right. I remember there was something about the stem cells that they were able to do, but I just couldn't remember what it was. Ranger, I'm sorry. Did you have some other questions?
Yeah, just one more. Out of all of the apologists, no matter what the religion, out of all the apologists that are here on YouTube, which one annoys you the most?
Well, actually, I don't pay any attention to any of them. I'm terrible in that instance. It's like the whole, there's this huge whatever, that Milwaukee convention.
Yeah, I got you.
I have no idea who any of those people are. I generally don't know who any of the the Christian apologists are. It doesn't float in my circle. So, I mean, I've seen some various apologetics. I'm familiar with the concept. Still don't understand why you would call it apologetics. That just seems well, we're sorry.
That's when I heard that first time I heard apologetics, I was like, why are you apologizing? Oh, that's not what it means. Well, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have to tell you this lie.
Yeah. So, I don't pay any attention to that. I know there's all kinds of scandals and things in various groups, communities. Unless I'm somehow directly involved, I don't pay any attention to them because there's just too much other stuff to worry about.
Yeah, I totally get that. Matt, did you have some questions for our guest?
I just had one. When did you become an atheist?
I didn't really start calling myself as an atheist until I was in my early 30s. And I'm not entirely sure what made me do it. I mean, it was after 9/11, and I mean, I still wasn't in tune with like Dawkins and them saying, it doesn't matter what your religion is, it's bad, it should be done away with. But just at some point after that, I realized I got to speak up. I got to call myself an atheist. I mean, I was more than willing to admit to myself I didn't believe that there was a God, but I wasn't willing to use that term.
Since we have no other questions, Tucker, where can they find your show and other places they can contact you at?
Well, it's on iTunes, Stitcher, all the usual podcast places. There's the Facebook page, The Atheist in the Trailer Park. If you Google that, I'm pretty much the only thing, I'll be the first hit that comes up. The site for the show is tparkatheist.blogspot.com. I've got an actual URL that redirects to it, but I can never remember it. So
I know the feeling. I did have a question. Do you have a Twitter account or anything like that? Or
yep. That's linked to on the page.
Well, you might want to give it for our listeners here because they, a lot of people are.
It is tparkatheist on Twitter.
tparkatheist. All right, very good.
While we are poking at your news, you can poke us at Facebook and Twitter, or poke us with an email at ppapodcast@gmail.com. or leave us a message at 662-709-PPAP. Join us live on YouTube/Packard Pokset on Friday nights at 9 p.m. Central Time. Be part of the conversation by live chatting with us during the show. Enjoy the show? Help support us by becoming a monthly patron at patreon.com/Packard Pokset. Or look awesome by buying something at cafepress.com/Packard Pokset. No money, no problem. You can help us by sharing the show with friends and rate us on iTunes and Stitcher. For everyone that shares and rates us, you kick ass.
The Atheists,
The Bible.
and No Wardrobe, the podcast.
Wait a minute. No wardrobe? You mean we're going to be naked while we do this?
Well, seeing how I'm an atheist and I'm reading the Bible, and since clothes are flammable,
Fire! Fire! Fire!
I thought it might be a good idea to take them all off first.
Naked or not, follow along as we read, analyze, and try to keep you from falling asleep as we go through this boring-ass book.
Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker. Who knows? We may even be on YouTube someday. And be sure to join us for our secondary podcast, The Atheist, the Bible, and No Wardrobe. We're still in the book of Exodus, and apparently Moses, in this last episode that we just did, filmed his first snuff porn. Check that out. You can find that on any podcast catcher that's out there. Fox News is a pile of misinformation, and studies have shown that if you listen to Fox News, you know less about what's going on in the world than not reading any newspapers or not having anybody telling you what's going on in the world at all. And of course, that's their narrative. They have to point the finger at everything else except for the thing that was actually what caused it. What I'm referring to, they're blaming CNN and atheism directly for the Vegas massacre. Let me just say this right now, that, and I said this right at the top of the show, that we still do not know the motivations of the shooter. We don't know. His girlfriend didn't know. She was over in the Philippines. In fact, he said, I got you a cheap ticket to the Philippines so you can go back to visit family. And then he wired her a ton of money, like $10,000 or something. And she said, $100,000. Thank you. $100,000. And she thought, well, he's breaking up with me, and this is like breakup money. I'm like, I wish somebody would break up with me like that. Just send me $100,000. I don't want to be with you anymore. Here's $100,000. I'd go for that. I would definitely go for that. Or you could just, donate $100,000 to the show. I'd be fine with that too. Getting back to the story here, Fox News is blaming CNN and atheism for the shooting in Vegas. None of these two things are related. And one of the things here, they said that the fiasco began when the forensic psychiatrist Michael Wellner told Fox News on Tuesday morning that CNN was to blame for the mass shooting in Las Vegas, declaring, I think CNN is going to have to answer how they demonize gun enthusiasts and how CNN actually contributes to mass shooting. And I think that they do. Really? Michael Wellner? You're an idiot. I don't care what your profession is. You're an idiot. To say something inflammatory like that is just bizarre. And on top of that, that makes their egregious error even worse when they had another person that was on that show, Laura Ingraham, who seemed to agree with someone else was on the show that said that atheism was responsible for the massacre, who also declared, we've done a lot to kick Christianity, God, to the curb in our society. Bottom line is basically they're saying that because there's some people out there that don't believe, we're like a quarter of the percentage. I mean, Christians, you are still 80% of the population.
72, last time I checked.
72? I heard 80, but 72 is fine. I mean, it's right in there. They're basically saying that we were responsible. And the fact is that atheism has nothing to do with it. It's not a belief system. It doesn't say, hey, go do a thing because you don't believe in God. It just says, hey, I just don't believe in a God. Period. That's it. I just don't believe you when you say there's a God. It has nothing to do with it. There are people out there who are atheists that believe in UFOs. It has nothing to do with their atheism. There are people out there, and I encountered one recently. He was a bigot, but he's like, oh, I'm an atheist, and it has nothing to do with his atheism. But he's still a bigot, regardless.
Right. And, all his brother said was, well, I don't know what his beliefs are. He said he's never been overt about being, religious. He's never been overt about being an atheist or whatever.
In actuality, that's very common. You were telling us earlier that how you were Lutheran. When I was still religious, my family, they claimed to be Lutheran. And the fact is that we didn't go to church. I mean, that's the general population. The people say, well, I'm a Christian. Do you go to church? Nah, I don't have time for that stuff, so I just don't go. And I would say that's the bulk of the society. It's like they say that they're religious, but they don't really practice it. It's almost a cultural thing at this point.
Right.
Ranger, your thoughts?
Earnhardt was insinuating that it was a country singer, and again, forgive me for not remembering the country singer's name, but I guess
Jason Aldean, apparently.
Yes, thank you. I guess his last song that he had performed, after he performed his last song, he said, "God bless America." And Earnhardt, to me, what got me pissed was that she said, well, that Aldean saying "God bless America" had set off the shooter. I'm like, really? You have no idea what's going on through his mind. You're not a psychiatrist. You're not in any position of authority to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And like Fox News will blame anything but the actual subject, which is the gun laws in this country are a joke. They are. It is way too easy to get a gun in this country. In fact, speaking of CNN, I don't know if either of you remember this, but CNN did like a experiment, I think it was last year, where a 13-year-old, he went into a store, he tried to buy a porn magazine, he couldn't get it. He tried to buy a cigarette, he couldn't get it. But that 13-year-old went to a private gun show and was able to buy a shotgun.
I think we actually talked about that on the show a number of years ago.
Yeah, so let that sink in. Like, for speaking to our audience, let that sink in. In this country, it's much harder to get a porn magazine and cigarettes than it is to get a gun.
Yeah.
It's harder to get an abortion than it is to buy a gun.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say, now the quote I was thinking of, it's actually here on the page here. It says, Steve and Brian, what's interesting is our last guest, the forensic psychiatrist, says, quote, when you have someone who's young that does something like this, they do it for notoriety. When you have someone who's older, they do it for a cause. And maybe this guy heard a song, God Bless America. His brother said he didn't believe in God, which Tucker just completely blew out of the water, or didn't have a God, or didn't have a faith in his life. So maybe all this speculation, but that possibly could be the reason, because he knows country musicians or country music fans are normally pro-God and go to church on Sundays. How do you know? How do you know what they do? You don't know that. You can't know that. Maybe he has a problem with that, or he had a problem with that. Where do you get the gall to say this? You don't know anything about him. Nobody knows hardly anything about him.
At this point.
And also the guy had reservations at hotels for other music festivals. It's possible that his plan was to shoot up this one, then go to another music festival, which it was a rock and roll music festival, shoot up that one, and then go to we cannot really say what his plans were, what his intentions were, other than he wanted to kill a lot of people. We don't know why he wanted to do that. We can speculate. I can't find it, but somebody had somebody shared with me a Twitter thread that who said, this guy was a gambler. He was a multimillionaire, and there are a lot of things about his gambling practices that don't add up if you think he's just an ordinary gambler. But he was, they say he was probably a card counter. And yeah, and they're like, this guy, apparently he supposedly made, lots of money off of real estate and lots of money off of gambling, which would indicate that he was a card counter. But when he wasn't playing, the tables, he was doing the slots. Well, if you're the kind of gambler who makes good money off of gambling, you're not somebody who plays the slots.
Okay.
But if you're a card counter, you will play the slots because it throws the casino security off as to what you're doing.
Interesting. Yeah, because if you're just doing just one activity all the time, they kind of catch on to that stuff and you get banned. And now, based on what you were saying, I'm going to make a little speculation of my own. Maybe he was in debt. He had some money, and that's why he transferred it out. But I mean, maybe he owed a few favors to somebody, and
right.
They put him up to it.
That certainly seems plausible. Or it could just be that he was frustrated and decided to take it out on people in general. But the thing that I'm wondering about, and I haven't heard any details on, is how much financial damage has happened to, at least Mandalay Bay, if not Vegas as a whole, as a result of the shooting.
Right.
Well, I'm just thinking, hey, I'm in hock to this casino to the point where I'll never be able to get out of it. And I'm a little crazy, shooting things up and, hurting them as bad as I'm hurt wouldn't necessarily seem to be unreasonable.
Yeah. Now that doesn't sound too unreasonable. I mean, maybe he was in debt and he just had some extra cash that no one knew about, and he was trying to hold on to that, or the money that they wanted from him. He decided to ship out, so, and that's the money that he sent to his girlfriend. It was over in the Philippines, $100,000. So yeah. I don't know this. Of course, like I said, this is all pure speculation on my part on those parts. So I'm going to say this. We know more about his girlfriend than we do him. And the fact is that we're not blaming the weapon part, like the gun part, which was not being able to be regulated because it doesn't shoot bullets on its own. I mean, it literally doesn't do anything except for make the recoil go faster. And that's all. It had no regulation on there. And it was approved during the Obama administration, at least once. But nobody wanted to say this gun part might cause issues. We should regulate it. But now all of a sudden the NRA wants to step in and they want to regulate that gun part, which the funny part about that is if it was something that was able to shoot, the NRA would say, we still want to keep this unregulated because, it's a gun. But since it's not a gun and it's just a gun part, they want it regulated all of a sudden, which I find that completely funny.
I think they're starting to realize that in a situation like this, if they objected too strenuously to things, they would quickly find themselves on the losing side of things and in worse shape. This is the sacrificial lamb so they can keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Because, we know what the pattern is. Somebody, makes a big mass killing, they get infamous. So the next person who wants to do it, they're going to have to up the ante.
Yeah.
The Pulse nightclub shooting, was the biggest shooting we've ever had in American history. Aside from, Wounded Knee or whatever you want to, there's a few other things, but those were multiple shooters, things like that. This is the Pulse nightclub was the largest mass execution by a single shooter until this guy. The next guy is going to try and figure out a way to do it so that he kills more people.
And the thing is, I've been following this online on a lot of places, and people posted it's like when they say this is the biggest mass shooting in a while, and because 500 people, 400 or 500 people were shot, maybe up to 600 people. I'm not sure the exact number off the top of my head, but a lot of people are saying, you know what, this is not the greatest mass shooting. We have a lot of things that happened in our history where there were a lot more people who were killed, up to 500 people or more were killed in different situations, and it's like kind of forgotten about those situations. But I want to put a little tag on that. It's the biggest modern shooting. I mean, in modern times, not necessarily in our entire history, but in modern times, perhaps.
Yeah, there was, I cannot think of the guy's name or the event. There was a guy in the 1920s, somewhere around there. He blew up a school, basically.
Yeah.
It was like a middle school, and it was in the Midwest somewhere, but it was one guy, and it was really actually the biggest mass killing by a single individual. And I don't know if it has been surpassed because I can't find it. Because everybody, all they want to talk about is the most recent one. And everybody at work just about refers to it as the Los Angeles shooting, not Las Vegas. They have,
oh my gosh.
They pay so little attention to the news, they can't even get their city right. And
that reminds you of the one is like when the Trump, or not Trump, or it was Trump's Kelly Anway or whatever her name is. She says the Bowling Green massacre. It's like, or the one that happened in Louisiana. It's like, no, that wasn't Louisiana. That was the one in Florida. It's like, apparently there's ones that we didn't know about, according to these people.
Yeah.
All right, one real quick here. Matt, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I just found it. It's the Bath School disaster, or the Bath School massacre, happened in Michigan in 1927. The fatalities were 45, including the perp. It was a bombing, and the non-fatal injuries were 58. So, the latest thing has even beaten that.
Yeah, that's horrible. I mean, I would hate to think what he would have been able to do if he had been able to get away and do this again. And I may have mentioned that earlier, that he had set up cameras throughout the building, places, strategic places where he thought, I'd be able to see where the cops are coming from and I'd be able to get away. So I'm just waiting until something like that happens a little closer to home. And the thing is, Republicans don't want to do anything about it until it happens to them,
Well, even then, I was listening to a podcast today. It's called Stay Tuned with Preet, and I can't remember the gentleman's full name, but he is that attorney general from New York that Trump fired shortly after taking office. And he talks about, he had a guy by the name of John Miller who he works. He's like the head of intelligence for the NYPD now. He's been a journalist. He's been other things. He got an interview with Bin Laden in the late 90s. And he said, I thought that, when they killed kids, we would do something about it. That didn't happen. I thought, well, when we kill politicians, we'll do something about it. And that obviously hasn't happened, because we've had 2 shootings of politicians in the recent years. I mean, we had Gabby Giffords, and then that nut job who shot him up earlier this year.
Oh, yeah. The one that went down to the baseball and was shooting down there.
Yeah. Now, and he's like, and, we've had the kids at
Sandy Hook.
Yeah, Sandy Hook. Thank you. And all these other things, and we're not doing anything about it. Honestly, my personal opinion is somebody goes down, shoots up Wall Street, we'll see a big change, because it affects a lot of people financially.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're not going to see a rapid change in the laws. We're going to have to do like what the American Lung Association started doing in the 60s and going after the tobacco companies. And what most people don't know is the disinformation type folks who worked for the tobacco companies up until fairly recently have all gone to work for the gun manufacturers and the NRA and a few other and the oil companies and things like that. But as far as I know, the people who worked on the anti-smoking campaigns haven't gone over to the gun safety advocates or the gun control advocate groups to start crafting ad campaigns and legal attacks against the gun companies. Speaking as a machinist, I know how to make firearms. I've actually, professionally, I've made components for them. I know how it's done. And even though the only machine tool I personally have right now is a drill press, I mean, I've got hand tools, but I have a drill press. I know how to make my own firearm with just that drill press and my hand tools. If I wanted a gun and I wanted to do it that way, I could. I don't. And I probably wouldn't do it that way anyways if I did want a gun, because it's a difficult procedure. And
right.
So they say, well, you can ban guns, but people will still make them, right? Okay, you give me a full machine shop, blueprints, or, even an existing gun, I can figure out how to duplicate that thing, but that is an awful lot of effort.
Can you make a gun that just squirts lemonade? I'm just saying. I mean, I think that would solve a lot of problems. You just make them all squirt lemonade. They can't squirt any other. No, you can't squirt water because it'll just jam it up. It's got to be lemonade. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I'd have to teach myself some electronics to do it, but it could be done.
Yeah.
But so I mean, if you ban guns, yeah, sure, somebody could make themselves one, but they're unlikely to do it because it would be easier for me to go get a propane tank and rig that up to explode than it would to be make a gun.
Yeah.
So I mean, we get rid of, or we restrict access to guns. We'll cut down the number of shootings. Yes, we'll still have murders and other things like that, But, you know, I mean, once we get to that point, we can then tackle the underlying causes in our society, which make people think that murder is a viable option.
Our prisons are populated with people who believe in God and have committed murder. The atheist population is less than 0.01% of those people are most likely, if they are murderers, they're less than that. And our history that I noticed anyway, we only had one guy, and that wasn't even because of his atheism. It was just because of the parking space, and we covered that a number of years ago.
Right,
so,
right.
I blame somebody.
Yeah, I was going to say, they always want to blame somebody, everything except for the gun and the person that did the thing there. And I want to call this what this is. If this had been a Muslim man or a black man or something, they would have said terrorism, or it was all black people or whatever. But if it says it's a white guy, oh, he was just troubled.
Yeah.
No, he was a terrorist. Let's put this out there. He was a terrorist. He did a terrorist action. Even if he wasn't backed by ISIS or Al Qaeda or whatever, this is still a terrorist action.
Right. Well, you know, when you get down to it, terrorism is committing an act that puts terror in the hearts of people.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what this was.
Well, I mean, if I may play devil's advocate here, I think the reason people are hesitant is because terrorism also, by definition, is doing active violence for a political or religious reasons, and obviously we don't know his motives yet.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I was going to actually bring that up. That is part of it. It is done for a political reason usually, or a religious reason. Actually,
under Nevada law, it makes no mention of political or religious reason.
Really?
Yeah. Somebody posted in one of the groups I'm in on Facebook, somebody posted a link to the law, the Nevada law. It does not specify that it has to be for a political or religious purpose.
Interesting, because I was only going by what the definition in the dictionary basically said. So
right, but dictionaries are what is common usage, not necessarily as it's being applied in the real world.
Right.
And because they're constantly revising dictionaries because language is always evolving. And I mean, really, does it matter why he shot the place up? He scared people. He terrified people. Mm-hmm. That's terrorism.
Yeah. I often say that to Christians because they try to scare people into believing by saying, if you don't believe, you're going to go to hell. So I just call those guys that do that. I call those people emotional terrorists. So then they don't like it, but hey, you go around making threats like that. You're basically a terrorist at that point.
It's the Onion Radio News.
No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it isn't.
People like to adorn themselves with all kinds of things, crosses, lots of gold. If you're familiar with Mr. T, he always had gold everywhere. I mean, I think the man has no more neck. I mean, he had so much gold on his body. I mean, how could you even function like that? But there's a British model. She decided to take part of a very personal part of her body and turn it into designer jewelry. Now, what she did was she had some surgery. She had a labiaplasty. What happens in the labiaplasty, they removed basically part of the labia. And the reason why she did this is because there was a cyst there, and that's a very sensitive area to have a cyst. And they had to remove some parts. So instead of getting rid of the tissue, which is what most doctors or hospitals do, they don't say, we cut this thing out of your body. Would you like it? But she said, hey, you cut off this piece of me. I want you to give this to me.
Tracy Kiss, thank you.
But she made a choker out of it, and there's a picture of it. She holds it up there. And because it's not embalmed properly or preserved properly, it shrivels up and turns gray. So she decided to put glitter on it because that makes everything better. Is just put glitter on it. Okay. Atheist Ranger, your thoughts?
Just wow. Just when I thought I'd seen everything.
I know, right? There's some really weird people out there with some really weird things there.
Just when I saw all the kinks in the world, I get surprised.
Yeah, yeah, no, right? I didn't think anybody was going to actually do this, I mean, the thing is, they're not equal pieces. Like, one side looks like it's a little bit longer, and the other one is a little smaller, and it's got a little curve to it. I like looking at that part of a woman's body. I didn't think I'd see it around a woman's neck. I mean, not like that anyway. Matt, your thoughts?
I'm reminded by the song by the Doors, "People Are Strange."
Yes.
Yeah, it's just weird.
It is incredibly weird. It's incredibly weird.
I would have to agree with the atheist on that. You've seen everything, and then you see something like this. It's like, okay.
Yeah, the things that people do it's just amazing. Tucker, your thoughts?
I have serious doubts about the validity of this story. First of all, claims that there was a cyst, and that's why she had to have them removed.
Right.
Now, there is a whole thing, apparently, where people are having plastic surgery to their labia to make it look more like what they see in pornography.
Yeah, that is actually very common, actually.
Yeah, so, she talks about having had breast implants and still having them. So I'm thinking, that's a possibility. Also, the other thing I'm thinking about is I know somebody who recently underwent gender reassignment surgery.
Mm-hmm.
They were not allowed to keep their parts.
I do want to point out one thing here. The fact is that this did not happen here in the United States. This did happen over in Britain. So they might be a little bit more lax and say...
Right, but see, here's the thing. Is one of the reasons why you're not allowed to keep your parts is because they're biohazard.
Right, that's very true.
It could be different in the UK than it is in the US, but I'm not inclined to think so. And I'm saying this as a guy who, when he was a kid, thought the neatest thing in the world was his grandfather showing him the jar filled with these gallstones.
I think they do let you keep those.
Yeah.
They're not biological, they're just stones.
Yeah, but like in the 50s, now, again, this was in the US, but you would figure that the laws in the U.S. in the 50s would be way more lax than any laws in the UK are now when it comes to these things. In the 50s, William S. Burroughs was infatuated with somebody, and I don't know who it was, and they did not share his interest. So he, a state of depression or fueled by his drug abuse, he thought that it would be a really good idea to clip the tip of his pinky, from the knuckle up.
Oh.
And send it to him. What he didn't count on when he did that, Burroughs went to med school at Harvard, so he did have some medical training or whatever. He didn't count on how bad it would hurt, and he wound up in the ER.
Oh, no.
And this was before they did reattachment surgery, so they just, treated it as an amputation. But that stub of a finger, they didn't let him keep it. They issued it a death certificate and incinerated it.
Wait. They gave him a death certificate for a piece of his pinky.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a number of years ago they were giving death certificates for Cabbage Patch dolls, but not for, I don't know if that story was even true either, but I mean.
They do write out death certificates, and that they use that term for lack of a better one. For if you have a leg amputated, they issue a death certificate for that limb.
Is that still practiced today?
Yeah, because part of that is you find a body in the woods, let's say, they're missing a leg. And if the body's in the right state, depending on the state of the body, when you find it, you may not be able to tell when they lost that leg. Mm-hmm. So if, you have a person who's missing and you have a death certificate for their leg and you find a skeleton in the woods that has no leg from, like, say, the knee below, death certificate says their leg was amputated at the knee below, then you've got a probable match.
Well, that's interesting. I did not know that. That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Lots of people fell for it if it's a fake, so don't feel bad at all.
If it turns out to be a fake, then it's it's one of the best fakes that we've had on this show. So
and like I said, major news outlets have covered it, so it could entirely be valid or it could be a fake. I'm inclined to think it's a fake, but that doesn't mean anything. I am no medical expert. I certainly don't know anything about British medical laws, so it's entirely possible they could have given it to her, but my instinct is to think this is garbage.
We do have a few listeners over in Britain, so if you're listening and you can comment on this and let us know in the comments below if this was actually a thing if this actually was a real thing or not, or if we're just being completely pwned over here. Because in the land of fake news now, trying to get the right story sometimes is a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Teach me how to be sensible, logical, oh, responsible.
And tonight we have our logic game, and I'm going to try to see if our guest and our co-host here have brushed up on their logic. And our question for tonight is, our statement anyway, is: you say Israel should stop building settlements on the West Bank in violation of treaty. So you're saying Israel doesn't have the right to be a nation? Is this A, a spotlight fallacy, B, misleading vividness, C, appeal to a common practice, or D, a straw man? Atheist Ranger, what do you think it is? It's A, B, C, or D?
I would say B.
You say B. You say misleading vividness. Okay. Matt, what do you think it is? Do you think it's A, B, C, or D?
I'd have to go with C.
You go with C, appeal to common practice. Okay. Tucker, what do you think it is? Is this A, B, C, or D?
I would say it was B and D.
Okay, no, it could only be one. You have to choose one.
Well, then I'll go with D.
You're going with D. Okay. We got a split decision tonight. Our actual answer is D, straw man. Creating a distortion or simplified caricature of your opponent's argument and then arguing against that. That's an actual straw man. Because I come across religious people say, oh, that's a straw man fallacy. It's like, no, it's not. I'm not arguing against something that you didn't just say. I'm not creating a different scenario. Tucker was right. It is a straw man. Congratulations. Most of our guests usually get this, the fallacies when we have them on. So, which is great. That's it for us tonight. Tucker, one more time, where can they find your show?
Stitcher, iTunes, wherever finer podcasts are prevailed. Just look for the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast, and you can find me on Facebook at Tucker Drake or the Atheist in the Trailer Park, and the website for the show is tparkatheist.blogspot.com.
Very good, very good. All right, we will be back on Wednesday for our midweek show at 5 p.m. Central Time. Just look for Chicago, and if you'd like to make a donation to the show, please go to patreon.com/PackardPokesat or a direct donation to paypal.me/PackardPokesat. You make a direct donation directly to me instead of going through Patreon, which is a lot easier for me anyway. We'll see you then. This has been Packard Pokesat. We just poked at your news.
And that's a wrap.